We're live. Awesome. And do we have Councilwoman Villarreal? Can somebody turn a screen on so I can see her?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
I don't know if you want to see me.
Okay, are you, all right, so you're just gonna talk to us from on high?
I can zoom in. I mean, I
That's
can put my camera on when I need to.
Okay, that's fine. Whatever you need to do. All right, at 5:02, I am calling the Finance Committee meeting to order. And if we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassett. Here. Councillor Lindell. Councillor Rivera. Councillor Villarreal.
Present.
Councillor Romero Worth.
I'm here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, terrific. I believe we do have a change to the agenda.
Yes.
Director Oster.
Yes, Madam Chair, we have one change to the agenda from staff. We are removing item A, which is the minutes from the previous meeting. There's a typo in the caption, so we'll resubmit that next time.
Okay, and if there aren't any other changes from the committee, can we get a motion? Second. Motion and a second to approve the agenda as amended. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. We are on to approval of the consent agenda. I believe there were a couple of things that were pulled. Counselors, I don't know. I don't know how we want to do this. Director Oster, you want to tell me what was pulled and
Certainly, Madam Chair. I have items G, K, and L pulled for tonight.
okay. And if we could get a motion on the consent agenda.
Move to approve as amended.
Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. We are on now to our presentation item. We have a audit update from Director Oster.
Yes, I'm pleased to give you an update. This week we have our consultants from Clifton Larson Allen on site, and that's very exciting. It's always nice to have some FaceTime with folks. They're working through a number of items. We had a good meeting with them this morning to kick off their on-site work. They are working through some questions that were submitted by Carr-Riggs Ingram. Carr-Riggs Ingram is doing what's called analytical procedures, which is where they put the trial balance for last fiscal year, which in this case was FY20, up against FY21, and they look for differences, and then they ask for explanations of those differences. So we're working through some questions on those analytics that were submitted last week by CRI on Friday. So CLA is assisting with that. And they're also helping with some questions from SWAMA about their draft financial statements for FY21. The focus with the onsite this week with CLA, with the consultants, is going to be preparing for year-end close for fiscal year 23 and getting FY24 set up, working on some potential system and procedural changes. And then, of course, continuing to focus on FY22, wrapping up items and cash reconciliation. Let's see what else. There is a significant accounting standard that we need to implement for FY22. I think we've talked about it before, but not too recently. It's called GASB 87, and GASB stands for the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. 87 is the number of the standards, and it has to do with leases, both situations where the city is leasing real property or equipment from someone outside the city, or the city is the lessor leasing to someone else. So that's a big implementation for FY22, and CLA, Clifton Larson Allen, is working on that. In terms of the prep, there's some feedback? No?
The vending machines have been doing that recently.
Thank you, counselors. I thought there was a cricket in here for a second. Excuse me. Okay, so
It's Counselor Lindell's pet.
Yeah, that's great. It's a nice soothing summer sound. Okay, so GASB 87, at least standard, that's a big deal for FY 22. We're working on that. We are going to be cutting off entries for FY 22 very soon. That's necessary for a couple of reasons. One, so we can continue to move forward with the audits, but also so that we can open FY 24 in early July. So, that's something that we're going to be working on. That's part of the planning for year-end close for FY 23. Let's see, with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? I think we're good. We'll move on.
Great, thank you.
All right, so we move on to the items pulled from consent. I believe the first item was item G, which is a request for approval of a memorandum of agreement between the city of Santa Fe and Santa Fe County for water gauge installation. And we have with us Steve Schultz, our Water Resources Coordinator, and Bill Schneider standing in the back. And I believe Councilor Rivera, you pulled this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I don't know, did you want them to talk about it, or you just have a question, or how do you want to proceed?
If they could just explain the reasoning behind it, why we're doing it, why on county versus city property, which I think runs below the treatment plan as well.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, the purpose of this is to monitor, backing up bigger picture. We need to go through this NEPA process, the environmental assessment of the effects of the return flow project. And obviously where there's gonna be less water discharged to the river, and we want to know the effects. And as part of it, our partner Bureau of Reclamation has requested we collect baseline data for pre-project conditions, as well as to continue on monitoring stream flow with the project once it's in place. So why the location? We have one device already installed on city property just below Paseo Real wastewater plant. And this one is installed farther downstream once we're onto county property. And in terms of locating exactly where on county property, there's hydrological reasons for that. There's basically spring flow just below this. River loses water to the groundwater in the stretch we're looking at. We want to make sure it's flowing at the bottom of that stretch once this project's in place.
All right, so you said pre-monitoring. I assume you'll get that baseline data. And then once the pipeline is installed, if those decrease significantly, does that then affect the pipeline project? Or could it?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, okay.
Councilor Rivera, thank you for the question. So it does not affect the project in per se of having it designed, built, and constructed. What it would affect is the obligations the city has agreed to comply with through our agreement with the Wild Earth Guardians. And so we've essentially established what I like to call a maximum minimum volume of water that will continue to be released to the lower Santa Fe River for both environmental and cultural purposes.
And, while you're up there, just wanted to take a minute to thank you for your hard work on this. It's my understanding that you played a significant role with Wild Earth Guardians, and wanted to thank you for that and for really working with them and making sure that we had an agreement that everybody could, everyone was happy with, really. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
My last question, Mr. Schultz, is I believe on your letter, which is towards the end, there's some blacked out stuff, which I believe is just latitude, longitude. Is that just for security purposes?
That's correct. There have been some monitoring devices that have been tampered with in the past, and we would want that in the public record.
Very good. Thank you. That's all I had, Madam Chair.
Other questions or a motion?
We'll move for approval.
Second,
Motion and a second to approve this item. I believe we need a roll call, Director Oster.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councilor Cassett,
yes.
Councilor Lindell, Councilor Rivera,
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth,
Yes,
Motion passes.
Okay, we are on to our next item, item K, which is consideration of a resolution supporting the establishment of safe sleeping spaces as a shelter option for those who are experiencing homelessness in Santa Fe and for whom standard shelter options are not feasible, identifying an appropriate best practices and data-driven approach to sheltering this population, and directing the city manager to enter into or bring to the governing body contracts for structures, sites for structures, landowners willing to provide an area for the structures, and an operator or operators capable of providing round-the-clock support services and 24/7 supervision. And we have with us Director Ochoa. And I believe did Councilor Lindell pulled this? Is anybody else? All right. So Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Let's see. I'm really curious why on the resolution itself, in the caption, it talks about and directing the city manager to enter into or bring to the governing body contracts. I want to see those contracts. I'm not comfortable with saying that the city manager enters into these. I think these are the kinds of contracts that the governing body would want to look at and know what we're agreeing to and whether are these purchasing, are these leases? What are these agreements that we're talking about?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, I'm here for Julie Sanchez, who's out sick, with a sick kiddo. So I'll do my best to answer. But so what's envisioned here is that, the contracts that we would be directed to enter into would follow the regular procurement rules. So if contract is under a certain amount, it wouldn't need to come to council. If it's over a certain amount, it would. And essentially there are two contracts that we'd be entering into if this resolution passes. One is to purchase pallet shelters. Those are the sort of tiny home structures that we had on display at the convention center during two of our town halls. I don't know if you all got a chance to look at them. I think you did. And those, I believe, could be purchased using a procurement method that does not need to come before the governing body. What would certainly come before the governing body would be any contracts or service provision and on a particular site if it's over a certain dollar amount. And we would anticipate that it would be given the cost of these services. So I think what the council might not see if we follow the regular procurement rules are the contracts we would use to purchase the shelters themselves. What the council would see is the contracts used to engage the SOS service provider and location.
Does that mean the leases?
So the leases for the pallet shelters would be part of the agreement for the provider, and that would be part of the package of the service provision. Actually, I have Brittany Rodriguez, program manager on this project here with me, who may be able to verify what I just said is accurate. Brittany, the question is, which contracts the council would see and not see were this resolution to go forward? My answer was that the council would see anything, would follow regular rules of procurement. So anything that was over 250 would come to them. The service contract and the site provider would come to them. The contract to purchase the pallet shelters would not come to them. And Councilor Lindell is asking about leases. And do we anticipate that we're going to have lease agreements on these? I think not, actually. nothing would be leased. The contract with the service provider would outline that the provider could use the city's pallet shelters, but not own them.
How much does each one of these pallet shelters cost?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, $7,000 to fully install, including installation.
Getting them shipped here, getting them put up, all costs involved.
Correct. The nice thing about these is that they have multiple uses. We're actually purchasing them out of emergency management because they've been used in other communities they can be used for folks displaced from fire or flood. So we would continue to own those shelters beyond the term of the contract with the service provider. I think they have a 5-year warranty.
So what's
Can
our-
you, yeah, you have to translate that or come to the mic. You said so you're confirming 5-year warranty and then you said something else. Sorry.
Chair, yes, a 5-year warranty, and then I don't know the details on the lifespan, but they're pretty durable and can last for quite a few years.
Okay. And since I have the mic, what's SOS mean?
Madam Chair, safe outdoor space.
Ah, there we go. Councilor Lindell, you still have the floor.
So do we have any idea of, so are we paying people then to, there's no lease involved. So where are they going to go and who's providing services?
So Madam Chair, were this resolution to pass, we would issue an RFP, basically requesting proposals from community providers who have a location that they feel they could use. Now we might get respondents who are partnering. For example, we might get a faith community partnering with a service provider. We might get a service provider who also has space where they would like to erect these shelters.
And what's the overall budget of the entire program?
The overall budget of the service provider and site preparation is 1 million, and that is in ARPA funds. And then we have additional funds identified in emergency management current year budget for the pallet shelters. And we're anticipating purchasing 25 pallet shelters at $7,000 per purchase. Without tax, that is $175,000.
So you said purchasing 25?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, yes.
Just give me a second here.
She's going to check your math.
Great.
Not checking that math. I'm checking a little other math.
Just keeping it light.
Okay, so with the cost of the shelter and the 1 million, we're talking about 25 shelters. We're talking about 47,000 per unit.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, we don't know yet what the provider's costs are going to be. The way the competitive solicitation is structured is we'd like to see what they come back with in terms of how much it's going to cost them. So that's part of what we'll do when we evaluate the proposals, is see what the actual cost is. There's nothing that says we have to spend $1 million on this, but that's what we've set aside. And the council has budgeted for unsheltered solutions to homelessness in our ARPA funding.
Okay, I'm just gonna put a reminder out there that at that cost, which I am really curious about what comes back on cost from the RFP, at that cost, that's $4,000 a month. A lot.
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, agree. We have looked at budgets on these projects in other communities. The typical budget for 25 units came back at 750,000 a year annually. So it's not a low cost solution, but it is a solution that looks at folks that cost our systems the most. So we'd also like to and plan to launch an evaluation around cost benefit analysis. You may recall that we did an analysis and the resolution mentions that it costs the city 14 million annually in public safety response and cleaning up encampments. So in a way, if you look at some of these high utilizers of our services of the county jail, we may find that 4,000 is not a high cost relative to what they're costing the system. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised. So anyway, it's comparable to what other communities have spent on these projects. And it is a pilot project. We want to see what happens. We want to see how this impacts unsheltered homelessness in Santa Fe for these hardest to shelter people that are essentially blowing up our systems. And I think we can evaluate at that point the benefit, the cost benefit.
What's the time frame on it?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, when the resolution is passed, if the resolution is passed, we will anticipate putting out, purchasing the pallet shelters we can do in fairly short order. And we'd like to do that anyway, as they have multiple uses beyond this use. So we'd do that before the end of this fiscal year. And then we would issue the competitive solicitation, we hope by May, assuming everything goes well, and have a sense of what we're looking at for the coming year. It'd be wonderful if we could launch the project sometime in the summer. Maybe the late summer.
So these pallet shelters, of course, don't have plumbing.
Correct.
So wherever, are all 25 of these, is the intent to put them all in the same place?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, that's a great question. Not necessarily. We're really allowing multi-awards with this. If that's what comes back, we want to see what the community is up for and ready to do. There has been a big groundswelling of support for this. In that the S3 Housing Initiative, that's a community partnership organization, and we have over 60 volunteers that are advocating for this and working for this. There's, I believe, multiple faith-based organizations that have expressed interest in this in terms of partnering with other communities. So it may be that we get 3 folks who want to put 10 pallet shelters on their site. And if their budget supports it, we might be able to do that. But we really wanted to see what we get back from the community to proceed.
So then who pays for the other facilities that have to be provided? Like, are these heated?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, yes, they have a heat unit and a cooling unit in them. They're well insulated for our climate. And the provider would pay utility costs on them. That would be probably part of their
So
proposed
they are
budget.
they electric?
They're electric, yes.
How about bath?
Plumbing, you asked about plumbing, sorry. If a provider has bathrooms on site that they're willing to have folks living in the shelters use, they can do that. We also have our mobile hygiene unit, which has not gone used. And if a provider needs a bathroom, we may look at using that in that site.
That's not being used.
No.
I guess it begs the question, why not?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, we released an RFP with the understanding we'd have at least one respondent. The respondent chose not to respond. We then converted that funding into staff positions for our park ranger program, including a custodian position. And we hired park rangers who are incredibly busy cleaning up encampments right now. So they haven't transitioned to running that unit, which was the original vision, because they really don't have the bandwidth for that, considering the number of encampments we still have out there.
What's a unit like that cost?
Oh, goodness. What did it cost? I think it cost about 125,000. I'd have to get back to you on the
Okay.
exact amount.
Too. So we've covered heat. Will these units have, I mean, how does our land use code allow for these units? They must be, I mean, they run on electric, they must run on an extension cord or something.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, our land use director, Jason Klug, has been involved in the planning of this. He's involved in looking over the drafts of the RFP. He's gone out to sites that have expressed interest to see what it would really take. I will defer to his expertise on how the electric works, but he's confident that we can permit them without changing our code.
So the possibility for bathrooms is perhaps the provider has bathrooms on site they can use, or we have one portable unit. What about other basic utilities and necessities? I mean, is there cooking? What?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, to clarify, the mobile hygiene unit does have 3 bathroom units and 3 shower units included in it. So gives us a little more. The food provision and the plan for that will be up to the provider. Some providers have kitchens, some would partner with entities that provide food, such as Youth Works or others. So what that looks like is sort of on the applicant to define, but that would be part of the cost. I think the other feature of this is that we have a consultant that Ancorum has contracted with, our partner in the S3 Foundation, Project Moxie, whom I believe has spoken to this body about the safe outdoor spaces. And they would provide technical assistance to the applicants in terms of how to work out their budgets, how to work out their costs, and what portion can be funded by volunteers, et cetera.
What's the term that a person can live in one of these?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, again, that's somewhat dependent on the provider and what they lay out. I think in general, the best models we've looked at have been flexible to some degree if people are looking for housing and actively working with case managers. Brittany, do you want to speak to that question?
Chairwoman, Councilor Lindell, the average length of time, I think, of a safe outdoor space unit is about 3 to 6 months. With the housing climate in Santa Fe, I would imagine that being a little bit longer for the clients staying in our SOS. But again, it depends on whether or not they're actively engaging in services. This isn't necessarily a project to house people. This is temporary, it's transitional, and ultimately the provider will be working to get those people into suitable housing, long-term housing, and sustainable housing. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is that there isn't really a time frame on it. Is that correct?
Correct. It would be up to the provider to kind of determine within their policies and procedures how long a person would be able to stay.
So what if a provider says, we're just going to let people stay here through the life of this shelter?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, one of the things we'll be evaluating when we evaluate the proposals that we get in is the provision plan, service provision plan. That's generally not a good model, and most providers of homeless services would not adhere to that model. So we have a ranking system when we look at RFPs, and I think that would be something we'd consider. I think, the problem is that you have to have, well, it's a good practice to have a little flexibility around it, given, as Brittany said, how hard it is to find housing here, as well as just individual preferences. Providers generally, if they're having somebody who's sort of parking, if you will, in a shelter and not working it, we see this in Consuelo's place, then there are plenty of people waiting to get into these places that would work with a case manager. And if that person's not doing it, the policies I've seen are universally restrictive of that. So I would expect that to be the case.
So do we have long waiting lists right now at our shelters?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, we have an extremely long waiting list at our non-congregate shelter in Swallows Place. I believe it's over 100, up to 150 people. We do not have a waiting list at Pete's Place, Interfaith Shelter, or I believe St. Elizabeth, although that ebbs and flows.
Do we make an assessment of why we have such a long list at Consuelo's Place and not at Pete's Place?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, what we understand from staff at all the shelters is that most people prefer and feel safer in a place where they have their own space, that they can lock their door. Some people don't feel safe in shelters that are congregate shelters, whether it's because of not having the ability to lock a door or, for other reasons that they don't feel safe in a group. So that's one of the main reasons that we hear.
How many people do we house at Consuelo's Place?
The number of people is a little variable because right now, I believe they're housing about 20 families. So those units are bigger, but it's an average of 60 people, 60 plus people at any given time.
How many?
60.
And that's the capacity of that facility?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, correct.
And is that based on the facility itself or the service providers?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, at Midtown, it's primarily the facility, although of course, as you add people, you have to scale up staffing as well. But if we had more capacity, they could serve more people with current staff.
Because, what's the building that's in on the campus?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, that's St. Michael's Hall.
And there's got to be a lot of rooms in there.
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, actually, no, they're all used. All the rooms that are usable are being used. A few of them have actually fallen offline because repairing the heating and cooling in those individual units is cost prohibitive, especially when the building is slated for demolition.
And the other dorm building there, is it King's Hall?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, yes, I believe it's King Hall, and I'm going to be a little out of my depth here. I see that Director Brown is in the room, but I believe that's being used for Santa Fe Recovery Center, and they're leasing
That entire building?
I can't say. I'd have to get back to you.
That's a big dorm.
Okay, I can't have people yelling from the audience, and Director Brown, if you want to come to the podium and answer, that's great.
Yeah, so we got St. Michael's, King. Is it King and Kennedy? What do we got?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the council, Councilor Lindell. I don't exactly know the names of the buildings. One is condemned, and Santa Fe Recovery has taken over the wing. I think they're at Kennedy Hall, and they had one section and they've now taken over a second section because they've segregated the clients that are there. So but right now the St. Michael's is full for the clients we have with Consuelos.
It's really hard for me to support this with the number of people that we're talking about, 25 people and that amount of money. It's a horrible amount of money, in my opinion. The other thing is that like I said, the caption bothers me. Who are the people that Standard Shelter Options are not feasible. And how do we define standard shelter option? I mean, I understand that one part of this is, people with pets, that's one. But what's a standard shelter option, and what's the qualifier for people, and how do they apply and they're the person selected for this?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, great questions. I mean, standard shelter option really refers to congregate shelter, so St. Elizabeth.
That's standard. So
Yeah.
places like on the campus are not standard shelter options.
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, correct in the sense that non-congregate shelter is unusual. Although it is becoming more considered best practice. It is a more expensive model. In terms of your question about who does not use or feel comfortable using congregate shelter, yes, it's people with pets, sometimes people with partners that want to stay with their partners. I should have said that pallet shelters can sleep up to 2 people. So if you have a couple or a mother and child, you could sleep those 2 people in that one pallet shelter. People who have PTSD, who've had bad experiences in shelter, who don't feel comfortable around other people in close quarters, people who are concerned about COVID or other communicable diseases, people who are actively using drugs, frankly, in a way that makes it hard for them to stay in shelter for certain hours, although there would be similar rules likely at an SOS, but maybe a little more flexible. So really this project would be designed to provide a shelter option for some of the most difficult to shelter people that our police department, our fire department, our alternative response unit is running calls on to a very high volume.
So
And who are sleeping in the camps that the park rangers are.
will these shelters be wet?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, it does depend on what the service provider proposes. They can be wet if the service provider proposes that. And for members of the public and the rest of the counselors here, that means that drug and alcohol use is not a reason to be expelled from shelter in and of itself. Behavior alone is a reason to be expelled from shelter. That's what wet shelter means.
I'm still really bothered by this caption. I don't know, maybe one of the sponsors could tell me why the caption reads the way it does in speaking that directing the city manager to enter into or bringing. I think that considering what we're talking about cost-wise, it excludes some of those contracts from being brought to us. And certainly I would like to see them. Second part of that question is, in purchasing these shelters, how many different options did we look at?
Madam Chair, Counselor Lindell, the Community Services team, the Youth and Family Services Division in particular, has been researching safe outdoor spaces for, I would say, 2+ years. And previous to Brittany, the program manager in that position looked at a huge array of options, everything from tents, ice fishing tents, which are a little better insulated. And then emergency management began to look at shelters that could be built. And these pallet shelters were determined to be the best option in terms of safety for the folks inside of them, as well as multiple uses beyond this one.
What are they called? Pallet?
Pallet
Pallet?
shelters, it's a brand name, actually. There's no other company doing this nationally. They've been used in Colorado and elsewhere. They are called pallet shelters because they come in on pallets and can be transported by forklift and then assembled.
Does anybody from the, of the sponsors want to speak to why the caption is the way it is?
I can speak to that. And as Director Ochoa stated, you know, it really does follow our regular procurement process in terms of we've already allocated dollars to this. We've had a lot of conversations about, you know, when we allocate money, and we know what it's going towards. And as Director Ochoa stated, most service providers, that contract is likely something that will come to the governing body, whereas the purchase of pallet homes, you know, as we agree to this, we're agreeing to the purchase of pallet homes. And so I don't see a need to bring a contract purchasing the thing that we agreed to purchase.
How could we have already agreed to this?
With the passing of this resolution, we would, because it does direct the city manager to do this work. And so with the passing of the resolution, we are stating, go forward and purchase these pallet homes.
Because you're going to need them to execute the rest of it.
Okay, I'll yield the floor for now.
Other questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera.
Madam Chair, so as I understand it, the city's gonna purchase all the pallet homes, I guess?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, yes.
Okay. And you said there are over 100 people that currently need shelter?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, we don't know how many people currently need shelter. We do not have good data on that. Part of what we struggle with is knowing the scope of the problem. I would say it's anecdotally from the folks that do outreach, around 500 people.
All right. Is any city property being considered for these?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, no.
So depending on how many landowners would respond to this, I mean, you could have, is there a limit on how many shelters you can have, or does it just depend on the size and how many they're willing to take?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, the best practice is not to have more than 50 pallet shelters on any given site. That's kind of a high number. Our constraints are essentially our own budget. And then, yes, what the service providers are willing to.
Did Jason Klug say anything about ENNs prior to these going up?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, my understanding is that ENNs would not be required for these because they would be part of the regular allowable use.
Yeah, that's a concern today. I'll tell you that.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, if I could speak to that concern a little bit. This is not a project that will succeed if it's, if you will, done under cover of night. This needs to be something that a neighborhood is completely engaged in, having their questions answered, having their concerns addressed. We have seen from our research that these projects, when run well, actually reduce crime in neighborhoods, and people are generally pleased with the presence of these. The good neighbor agreement that is required and will be required as part of the contract with any provider is a tool that's been used in other communities to ensure that there's complete stakeholder engagement, so people know what's happening and have their concerns addressed.
Right. So since the city's purchasing these and we're contracting with providers, I assume there's shared liability if something were to happen.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, yes, the providers are required to carry their own liability on it. I think the liability to us would be around something went wrong with the shelter that we had purchased and provided, and our liability would cover that.
What's the county's part in this? Because one of the whereases talked about a resolution between the city and Santa Fe County that formally aligns the effort. So what's the county's part in this?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, thank you for that question. The county has not committed to supporting this in the immediate. They want to see how the pilot goes, but I think they're very interested in how it does proceed. And I think they are a partner in our S3 housing initiative. We have regular weekly meetings with the county and the foundations that are also part of that alliance and group. And I think people are excited to see the city try this and excited to support and meet need that we may not be able to cover. So for example, I could envision, and we've talked about this, receiving 3 proposals and not having funding for enough of them, and going to the S3 Funders Alliance and saying, we have these 3 proposals, we only have enough funding for one of them. Is there interest from our partners in helping us fund others? Or we may do it for a year to pilot it as it's intended, and then go back and say, this was a success and we'd like to have your involvement.
So the county's not planning any SOSs in conjunction with us at the same time.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, no.
If we have a number of respondents and they're, we purchased 100 of these homes and we have 3 respondents, the mobile hygiene unit, how many of those do we have?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, we only have 1 mobile hygiene unit, so we could only use it for 1. We know of several faith communities that are looking at their own, restroom facilities as part of what they would offer, is what I understand.
Within their buildings, or would
Correct.
they plan on?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, within their building is my understanding. But if we needed to support a site with a bathroom, we only have the ability to do that with our 1 mobile hygiene unit for 1 site.
And since Jason doesn't believe in ENN's required for these, but you say that there should be communication with the neighborhoods, once they start getting the permits for this, what's to ensure that those neighborhood meetings happen?
Madam Chair, the Councilor Rivera, the Good Neighbor Agreement would ensure that those neighborhood meetings happen in advance of the launch of the project, as well as throughout the length of the project.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions from the committee? Councilor Cassett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't really have many questions, but I do want to speak to some of the concerns and put my public health hat on for a minute. Yes, this is expensive. It is. And I remember one of my professors in public health said, the problem with public health is that when it's working, people don't notice it, so they defund it. And then all of a sudden, there's this huge problem that takes a bunch of money that you have to spend to try to fix this enormous problem that if we had put the resources in to prevent it, we wouldn't be there. That is a lot of what we see in homelessness. It is not just what we are not doing now, it's what we haven't been doing for decades. And it's going to take a lot of time and energy and money and ideas and willingness to be creative and try new things. It's, that evidence-based approach. And so I know that it is a lot of money. I know that there's a lot of uncertainty, but what I am completely certain about is what we are doing right now cannot continue. It does not work. As one of the representatives in an area that is highly impacted by the numerous encampments that are springing up, really it's that when you look at the map, it's that Cerrillos Road corridor. And makes sense, public transportation, there's resources there, there's a larger population. And the cost that a lot of my constituents are experiencing with break-ins, with being concerned that there's going to be structure fires because people are just looking for anywhere that they can go and they need to keep warm. We are also working with the population, as Director Ochoa stated, it's one of the most challenging to house. And they have experienced the most amount of trauma. And I'll, channel my co-counselor right now, as Counselor Chavez always does such a beautiful job of talking about trauma. And again, that starts early. And there's a lot of work that we haven't done with prevention there. I think one of the most difficult parts about this, and I want to caution the governing body, is again, public health, we do these pilots, we get a year, and then it's like, show us your results. Public health takes years to really impact. And it's about how we invest in strategies and start to see the signs that they are working as opposed to looking for an end result. with obesity. When obesity leveled off, it was a celebration, not when it dropped, but when it just stopped going up. And I think that that's going to be similar here, that we're going to need to look at how many encampments that we are getting outside of these safe outdoor spaces. We're going to have to look at other strategies. I am in full support of this because, again, I know that what we're doing right now, we just cannot continue. It's costing us an estimated $14 million a year. We have individuals that are just cycling through the jails, the hospitals, and the cost to those systems as well are untenable. And in the end, we all eat those as well. I mean, that's one of the issues with healthcare is that when other people can't afford healthcare, you got to subsidize it somewhere. Everything gets subsidized somehow. And the feeling for a lot of individuals in my district, and I know in other parts of the city where they do not feel safe, they do not feel that the city cares about their homes and their quality of life because this is continuing and we haven't been able to move forward with something else. And to be perfectly honest, I have not heard of another solution that works or would work in our city. You know, Houston, they had a bunch of empty apartments after the hurricane. And so they were able to really utilize those. We don't have that. We have a massive housing shortage. So when you look at some of the models that have worked in other places, I frankly don't see another option. I do know it's a lot of money. And I think that this is one of those things that is really worth the investment, both for, again, this bleeding heart public health hat on my head of just the humanity of the unhoused individuals who, nobody makes the best decisions when they're in a moment of trauma and when they're in moments of crisis. And I know that a lot of people have this stigma towards individuals, and whatever we can do to help them move forward and find safety, as well as the rest of our community that really feel that this is a scenario that is deeply impacting their quality of life in Santa Fe. So if there's another model that looks like it would work here, hey, I would try that one too. But I think that we cannot even measure the cost benefit analysis of this because there's dollars and we can look at dollars, and that's, obviously one way that we look at cost benefit analysis, but there are these costs to the system, there are these costs to the neighborhoods and the costs to the individuals that are experiencing homelessness that I think are extremely hard to measure. I know this team will do their best, but it does become a gray area, and it is the place that that the social sciences really dive in and play. And I know that it is hard to wrap your mind around them because we like hard results, we like hard numbers, and that's not always something that we can do in this area. So I really am in full support. I really, I appreciate the questions and digging into this because this is so new. But I do not see another option for us at this point that really meets the call of all members of our community who are saying, we really need a solution for this. And again, if somebody has a better idea, be happy to hear it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have a few questions first, Councilor Lindell. So it's been stated that we spend $14 million a year on what exactly?
Madam Chair, we have actually Director Oster helped us all do this analysis where each department was asked to estimate their spending on unsheltered homelessness. A portion of that 14 million is on positive programming, which I would call, funding that we give to shelters. I believe, Director Oster, I don't know if you have the numbers in mind. speak to that.
Madam Chair and Councilors and Director Ochoa, I can rattle off a few that stood out for me. That
Yeah.
was, something that I did.
I think it's just important to get a sense of what, when you're throwing that number out there, what do you mean? And what demographic are we talking about here?
Madam Chair and Councilors and Director Ochoa, one of the things that really stood out to me was $250,000 elevator repair to the Sandoval parking garage for one incident of fire in the elevator. And essentially the entire elevator had to be rebuilt. So that is, very, very expensive.
And that's because there was a homeless person who tried to live there.
Chair, correct.
That's my understanding as well.
Okay.
Someone lit a fire for heat inside of an elevator, and as a result, the entire elevator had to be replaced.
Madam Chair, correct. The bulk of that number is our public safety response, both police and fire, and it's hard to get those numbers. The fire department has started to track when their responses related to an unsheltered person. They have now a field. Police department doesn't track that. So that was really a poll that Chief Joy did with his team. My recollection of what police spent.
Madam Chair and Councilors, I could look that up. I do recall that Public Works was spending roughly $40,000 a month in the warmer months in terms of encampment cleanup.
And I think the bulk of that 14 million is going to be found in public safety response time. And if we think about the cost there, that's cost that they're not able to devote to traffic stops, to other types of crime that people are concerned about. And, when I came into this role, I talked to a lot of officers and I said, well, what do you need? And in addition to increasing pay, which thanks to this council, we did that, and great working vehicles, thanks to this council, we did that. A lot of people told me we need you to solve homelessness because so much of our time is spent on that. And I think fire department similarly, I don't have the exact breakdown in front of me, but I know that for my department alone, you have it now. Thank you.
Is your mic on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have it open in front of me now. So based on this estimate, which was developed last fall, we had approximately 7 million in community development, most of which was in affordable housing, because you'll recall we were funding Consuelos Place through affordable housing. We had 3.7 million in community health and safety, which includes an estimated 602,000 in fire and 1.5 million in police. And that was based on calls that had a relationship to people experiencing homelessness.
And could we just stop there for a minute? The nature of those calls, I mean, it's somebody who maybe, well.
Madam Chair, it could be a man down call, somebody who's intoxicated and unsheltered. It could be a range of low level, non-criminal calls.
Okay, I just think it's helpful. And back to you, Director Oster.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilors. The other large expense is in Public Works, and that's where you see the kind of downstream impacts, I would say, in terms of encampment cleanup, repairs to damage. Also sprinkled throughout city government, there was a significant increase in security related costs, having security at facilities to address downstream impacts of unsheltered homelessness.
Okay, the Good Neighbor Agreement, can you speak to that a little bit? So you're saying that will be required of anybody who is given the opportunity to provide this kind of housing, these kinds of pallet homes? What is this Good Neighbor Agreement and how does it work?
Madam Chair, that's correct. It would be required of the provider to forge that with the neighbors, businesses, neighborhood associations and others. And Brittany, can you speak to the?
Is it a written thing? Is it
Yes,
it's a form? It's a.
Madam Chair, yes, it's a written agreement. I believe we'll provide a sample in the RFP But there are a range of them that come from other communities and it can be tailored to ours specifically.
We're not that scary. Don't worry.
I'm just such a big mouth. I say everything.
All right, so I mean, and so there would have to be some meetings in order to explain what's happening, and there would have to be, I mean, who signs it, how does it?
Madam Chair, thank you for that question. So Project Moxie will be a really great facilitator in this agreement. What they do is they come in, they come to the site where the safe outdoor space is going to be, and they work with neighbors directly backing up to that site or who may be adjacent to it. And it is a formal agreement that the neighbors and the safe site forge together, and there is accountability held by both the neighborhood and the safe outdoor space to meet regularly on whatever agreement that they may make. And the purpose of that is to have some sort of formal structure for neighbors to voice concerns or even to voice praise, and same for the safe outdoor space, to be able to keep neighbors informed of the ongoings of the space, what resources are available at the space that neighbors may also be able to access. So just having that very, very open communication and being held accountable in a formal contract.
Madam Chair, if I can add, the other layer of accountability is, of course, contract management by the city. So if the good neighbor agreement is not being followed, we're managing that contract with that service provider, and it's up to us to make sure it is being followed or have a consequence if it's not.
Okay, so we might come back to that, but so I think you said earlier that there will be no leases. So the city will not be leasing land from private.
Madam Chair, that's correct. We will not be leasing land from private landowners.
And so I guess that leaves that there are providers out there of services who have land where these pallet shelters could be erected.
Madam Chair, yes.
And their services, I mean, are we talking about like HomeWise that has vacant land? But they don't provide services. So we're probably not talking about HomeWise.
Well-
We're talking, or maybe we're talking about, I don't know, another provider that provides services and people go there to get the services, but maybe they have space.
Madam Chair, it could be that model. It can also, again, be a model where there's a landowner, perhaps a faith-based community landowner who is applying in partnership with a service provider. So that might be another model we see. That's what we would expect to see as we ask for the response, but we don't know what response we'll get. So we'll look at it all.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have. Councilor Lindell, you had
Yeah, I just,
follow-up.
can you get for me the specs on what'll be required for electric hookup for these? I doubt very much that an extension cord qualifies. And looking at some different places that have done this, they've had to put a sizable amount of money into making electricity available and meeting code. I'd be curious what Mr. Klug has to say about that.
Madam Chair, I'd be happy to do that. My understanding as we began to investigate, and Councilor Lindell, I'll be happy to get that to you. We began to investigate this, is that pallet shelters had thought about this quite a bit, and they had a mechanism whereby there was no need to dig lines or anything. There's a safe way to do it without doing that, but I'll get you those specs for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Rivera.
Thank you. Director Ochoa, if in the good neighbor agreement, if the neighbors didn't agree to these shelters being put up, what would happen in that situation?
Madam Chair, Counselor Rivera, I don't know.
There. And then was there any discussion about spreading these out through all the districts, not just in District 3 or 4?
Madam Chair, Counselor Rivera, part of why we opted to go with this competitive solicitation is to allow for that. There might be multiple applicants, and in my mind, ideally, we wouldn't overburden any one district or neighborhood with project or existing projects. So that's part of why we went with this model of allowing for what we get back. We can't necessarily dictate that where there must be one in each district, but if we get multiple responses from each district, we can consider that and consider the viability and the burden to any individual neighborhood.
I'll let you know that your good neighbor agreement, the response to the good neighbor agreement is what concerns me, especially since planning and land use said that it's not really needed. You're gonna put these SOSs up in the area. That happened. See to go up. That's a little bit of a concern to me. I don't know if the sponsors thought about that at all.
I would say that the good neighbor agreement is probably a approach that people would like more than our ENN model, based on what I've heard from the community, because this really is from my understanding, and Director Ochoa, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a collaborative negotiation that is an ongoing discussion of what are the current issues that individuals in the neighborhood are concerned about, and what are the steps that are going to be taken at the front end to mitigate those, as well as how do they have a system in place for when there are potential issues that could come up. They'll know who to contact. That contact will, it won't be kind of the giant cogs of city government, but it will be, an individual service provider and business, nonprofit most likely, that they will be able to be working with. And again, there's more of a back and forth. There's more flexibility, as opposed to an ENN, which, I've heard that is something that some people find challenging with our land use process. So I would actually say that the good neighbor agreement component is probably more beneficial to this process than an ENN.
So would it be your vision that if a majority of the neighbors did not agree with it, that it would not go up?
Yeah, that is a hard question to answer. And I think part of the issue is I think most places will not agree.
Yeah.
And
in that case, then it is exactly like our ENN process.
well, I think it's a little different, and again, in the sense that there is a negotiation going on. One of the hard things about this is that I don't think anybody will believe that it will not be a burden to the neighborhood until it's not a burden to the neighborhood. It's one of those that's like, well, we have all this data from all these other places that have shown crime going down, that have shown, positive results from the neighborhood. And we can provide that information. I think that it's incredibly crucial to validate people's concerns and not just say, well, you don't have to worry about it because here's the data, but you can't say, here is what we've seen. And this is what we have done, or this is what other providers have done in other places to address this specific concern. And we can replicate it or curate it to this specific neighborhood based on that. And that's why I think that good neighbor agreement is, I would hope that there are some individuals I have had, well, maybe I'm wrong that most neighborhoods would agree, because I have had individuals email me and say, this is great, this is wonderful, go ahead and put it in my backyard. Now, they're not as common as I would like them to be. I hope I get more of them. And I think that that really is going to be a lot on our partners to how we provide that education of how this has worked in other communities and what other communities have seen. And honestly, what are the stumbling blocks that other communities have gone through that we get to learn from, which is, you know, always a benefit. So I do think this is going to be hard, and I do think that this has to be done extremely well. I really trust this team to be vetting the service providers. It is also another reason why that investment in this is crucial, because if you don't put enough money towards it, it's not going to work. And then we're back to where we started. So I think that it'll be interesting to see how those conversations go. And I think that it is going to be really important that it is that collaborative process. And I understand that this might be a leap of faith.
Ms. Ochoa, is there a limited, at least a basic minimum of infrastructure that needs to be in place for the SOSs?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, it's recommended that they be on a relatively flat surface, like a paved surface. And I mean, I think other than that, there has to be a basic electric, I'm totally out of my depth here on the amps or something like that. That the property and the building, the existing structures on the property, if there are any, will allow. But the pallet shelters have been designed to be easy to set up with minimal infrastructure needs. So there are some basic minimums. You can answer. I love you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, the site prep for these structures has to be done by a licensed professional. So it's not just somebody slapping them up. Like, they will work with an architect, with an engineer if they need to make sure that the surfaces are leveled correctly, to make sure that the placement of the pallets is within the minimum distance of each other, and that the electrical service, and again, I'm not remembering the number of amps, but it's a very specific and clearly articulated requirement. So once that property owner is working with a professional, like it's not going to be a problem for them to have it installed correctly, and then it will have to get inspected and signed off.
Okay. Thank you. And then just one last question. I don't know who's best to answer it, but I assume there was some looking into the village in Denver, and what did we learn from that?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, there was a field trip up to some of the villages in Denver. And I think the community members who went, I did not go to that. Staff has gone to other safe outdoor spaces in the past. Were impressed with the way they were run. And again, the fact that neighbors who may have been skeptical at the outset were actually very glad that the project was in the neighborhood, had seen a reduction in crime, in their concerns around people wandering, et cetera. And so it was a joint effort. I think it was the other big takeaway. It was, in that case, I believe a faith-based community met with city support. But again, businesses in the neighborhood, residents in the neighborhood had all been engaged. People that did not want the project were actually some of those who were providing testimonial that this was actually quite a good thing. I think importantly, a lot of people were getting housed out of those projects that would currently or previously never have access services at all, because they were really loners and they hadn't built any trusting relationships with folks.
And is the Denver model the same one we're implementing here, where you partner with faith-based organizations or other partners?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, essentially, yes. That's what the competitive solicitation and the RFP will allow, if that's what our community wants to do. I think, we've learned a lot from trying to get one of these off the ground. I've been up at this podium and talking about potential of having one at Midtown. This, by the way, we just want to state publicly, this is not a proposal to put a safe outdoor space at Midtown. I'll say that again. This is not a proposal to put a safe outdoor space at Midtown. It is not a proposal to put safe outdoor space on any city property. What we learned from that is that the city alone cannot do this. We need people who are in our community who want to see it happen, who are willing to step up and make it happen, who are willing to find resources beyond just city resources potentially to sustain it. And so really, the resolution before you allows staff to know that this is something our governing body would like us to pursue and see what comes of it. Just as with the mobile hygiene unit, possibly you get no respondents. We don't know. We don't know what the community is up for here. We don't think that will be the case, but we need our community to help us. We need our faith community to help us. We need our foundations to help us. We all need help to solve this very, very intractable problem.
Is RFQ gonna mandate that at least that the that bathroom services are provided by the partner?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we have Councilwoman Villarreal with her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to just say a few things. Councilwoman Cassidy already touched upon the points I wanted to make, but I did want to say that, the difference on what we have now versus what we're trying to achieve with this is completely different, because this is a controlled environment. It's regulated. And right now, our encampments in any way, shape, or form are not regulated or do not have that controlled environment. So I think there's a big difference from what we're doing, what's currently happening now, than what we're trying to achieve with this resolution. And I think the other piece is like having the service provider partnership there. There will be integrated services. Right now, we don't have that in encampments or places that are not congregate, well, just in congregate shelters. And even there, it's limited. So I think that there's just a lot of room to look at the big picture when people, not everybody's going to be pleased with this, but what's the alternative? Having the encampments that are not only a major financial burden to the city, but also it's not necessarily providing the support that people need, obviously, and also the things that people are worried about in the community and neighborhoods. This, I feel like, is going to help with that controlled environment that we keep speaking about. So I'm just looking forward to trying something different. And I appreciate that Councilwoman Cassidy brought up the unknowns of what, we're trying to achieve here. But I think we're on a path of we needing to find something that's an alternative to what currently exists. Thank you.
Okay, we need to move on. We do have another item to get through. We also do have a stopping point in a 45 minutes-ish. So is there a motion? Move to approve? Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. If we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councilor Cassett.
Yes.
Councilor Lindell.
I'm going to abstain on this until I get more info.
Councilor Rivera.
I'm gonna abstain as well, and I don't know if we can get a copy of like what a good neighbor agreement might look like.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Villarreal.
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The motion passes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we are on to the final item on consent, a resolution preventing the use of the fee in lieu of option described in the Santa Fe Homes program on the Midtown site. We have Director Brown, we have Alex Ladd, and I believe we have two counselors who pulled this, Counselor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair.
And Counselor Cassett.
I'm having a hard time getting logged in here, but I actually don't have any questions on this, but I will make a motion to deny.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to deny this item. Do we have any questions from the committee? If not, can we get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councilor Cassett.
Yes.
Councilor Lindell.
Yes to deny.
Counselor Rivera,
This is part of something, trying something different, so, no.
Counselor Villarreal,
No,
Counselor Romero Worth,
I'm forgetting where I am. Yes, I'm forgetting which direction I'm voting.
on the motion to deny.
Yeah, yes.
Item L. Yes, okay. The motion to deny passes.
Okay. We have introduction of legislation, consideration of resolution 2023, a resolution adopting the city of Santa Fe's fiscal year 2023-2024 operating and capital budgets. And we have, this is just a bill introduction. So we don't take any public comment or anything, just this resolution's being introduced. From there, we go on to matters from staff. Director Oster.
Madam Chair, none at this time.
Okay. Matters from the committee. Counselor Rivera.
Madam Chair, the introduction of the legislation, is that the legislation that's discusses how you make changes to the budget?
So I'll let Director Oster address that.
Madam Chair and councilors, so this resolution introduces the budget that would be available for amendments. As far as the process goes, we'll be following the normal process for amending a resolution. So you would submit a request through legislative services to draft the amendment. And that request would include information about where you propose to take money out of, and then where you would add it to. So for example, department and category, which is listed in the attachment to the resolution, the proposed budget is included by department and by category.
So it's incumbent upon us to tell you where the money's coming from.
Madam Chair and councilors, yes, because we need it to be budget neutral. We can't include, we're not able to increase the total amount of expenditures, so we need to know where we're moving the money from.
Yeah, another way to say that, I think, is the budget has to be balanced by state law.
I'm just having nightmares about the final budget approval, because you're gonna have 4 counselors that probably are gonna look at the budget for the first time once it starts going through committee and through that final process, and who knows what the number of amendments may look like. So-
Well, it's not gonna go, the only committee the budget goes to is finance. So you can amend it during the budget hearings, and that amendment, if it passes, will attach to the resolution and to the budget as any other, just like in our normal process. And then we will approve the budget overall, and it'll be, here's the finance committee's recommendation on the budget to the governing body. And then if at the governing body meeting, there are counselors who don't sit on finance who want to offer an amendment, that would be the opportunity.
So how would we then, as the budget committee, amend the budget? Since this is just the introduction of the resolution, our budget meetings continue throughout the week and next week. So this,
Right. And so on the final day, we have approval of the budget. And I had initially thought that would be pretty quick, but if we offer amendments on that day, and I think you could, if you have an amendment drafted sooner, I think you could probably offer it. We can check with the city attorney's office, but
the resolution that's just being introduced.
right, because it's now, and it's being referred to the finance committee. So that's us. And so we'll be doing that either if your amendment's ready, I think we can consider it at any of the budget hearings.
Right, I thought the resolution needed to be approved before we could start making changes to.
No, because that is the vehicle by which we approve the budget. So, and I think you know, if you have things, an amendment, I think the city attorney's office would like, you know, if you know already there's something you want to do, it would be good to, you know, make your requests through the normal way we would request amendments.
Thank you.
And I guess, you know, the other thing I would say is if you look at, say, the state legislature, you know, it's kind of similar that way. They're, you know, the finance committees are the committees that make a recommendation to those bodies, the full House and Senate, what it is. You know, they mold the budget and then they offer it for a final vote in front of both bodies of the legislature. So that's sort of what we're doing here, is that we're molding the budget. Any amendments that we offer as a committee that are accepted will be attached to the budget. We'll offer that to the full governing body as what the budget should be. And then if, you know, just like a floor amendment at the legislature, other counselors could weigh in. Other matters from the committee? Where are we? Matters from the chair. Our next meeting is Monday, May 1st of this group as the Finance Committee. But of course, we will resume budget hearings tomorrow, and they start at what time, Director Oster?
Madam Chair and councilors, let me verify that. I want to make sure with our different start times. Tomorrow we start at 1 p.m. and
Okay.
we'll be hearing the Public Works budget.
Okay, terrific. So we'll be convening as this committee at 1 p.m. I'm sorry, sir, we don't have public comment here. Thank you. We are adjourned.